Hey guys, this is GamerCow. Welcome to another Pokemon TCG discussion for our first modified format here. I've kind of been really enjoying actually doing these little supplemental type videos on stuff here, like rather than just going all in on only the draft thing. It's been kind of nice being able to actually have a little bit of a discussion about stuff that's going on here. So even if they don't do especially well, I don't care because I think it's fun to talk about cards. So today's topic is going to be on the trainer cards that we actually have access to, and some that we will gain access to by the end of this rotation. We have just done our Neo Revelation draft, so we have some of the cards from that set in here as well, but we have two other sets before we rotate again, and I'm pretty sure I've managed to see all of the promo stuff as well. There's not really any trainers in there that we'd get, so this is the best of what we have. This isn't all the trainers, obviously, but it is the trainer sets that might actually see use one way or another. So I've kind of grouped them off into categories here. We have our draw cards, like our raw draw. We have our search cards. We have our recovery cards. We have our disruption cards, and we have our general, like, miscellaneous, but usually like utility cards here. So there's a bit to go through. There's a lot of healing and stuff in here as well, because some of it is actually pretty good. So there's not a lot. I think there's a total of about, what was it? It was just under 60 or so cards in here that are maybe useful. I mean, that is quite a few when you think about how many you can play in a deck. But it also really narrows down the style, and a lot of these are rares as well, so it's hard to actually pull a lot of them. I know I don't have half of the stuff like Mary, Pokegear, etc. So let's go over what we have and see like how good or otherwise our options will be here. So starting off with the draw cards, the best one that everyone will be playing, as many as they have, obviously is Professor Elm. You can't play more trainers for the rest of the turn you use this, which is a little bit annoying, but Shuffle Draw 7 is impossibly good, to be honest. It is absolutely insane. A lot of the decks that we have been testing do not have quite as many trainers as they used to. Like, we're looking at 25 to 30. Like 30 is the absolute most here. So, and that tends to be with like lower energy requirement decks as well. So most of our decks are using a lot of evolution cards. Professor Elm can shuffle draw to help you dig towards them, which is really good. One thing you'll notice, we don't have a ton of discard in this setup anymore. So there's a few, but for the most part our good draw options don't really discard anymore. So we kind of got to play with that in mind. But yeah, when it comes to draw stuff, let's just go through the rest of them in order here, because really it's 4 Elm is about the only one that you're typically going to see. So let's just go through. Bill's Teleporter potentially is a draw 4. If you flip Tails though, it does nothing. So you probably want to pair that with the next two actually on the list here. Blaine's Gamble and Blaine's Last Resort. You definitely need to play these as a pair if you're going to play them at all. Blaine's Last Resort only works if you have just Blaine's Last Resort cards in your hand. Key note actually, as Leo sort of brought up to me, this one is not the only card in your hand. It is, you can only play it if the only cards you have are Last Resort. So if you had 4 copies of this card in your hand, you could still play it. And then draw 5 is insane, right? But I just mentioned we don't really have a lot of discard in this format, right? So it's hard to pare your hand down to do stuff like this. That's where like Blaine's Gamble comes in. We actually lost the OG Gambler, so rest in peace, riskiest card ever. This one, you discard as many cards as you want from your hand, then flip a coin. If heads, you draw twice that many cards. So best case scenario, you probably discard like 4 cards and draw 8, right? Or 3 cards, draw 6, maybe somewhere in that sort of range. Worst case scenario, you obviously draw nothing. You discard your entire hand and that's it. However, the compromise is that if you're playing with Last Resort here, if you discard everything that isn't Last Resort, you either get a gigantic, probably draw 8 to 10 cards, or you can play Last Resort now. and you can draw 5 anyway. So you are still going to get a draw, it's probably just going to cost your whole hand off it. It's not as strong as Professor Oak was that way, of a discard draw 7 on one card, right? But these two will pair very well together, and I actually do want to try this out, I just don't know what to pair it with right now. Bill's Teleporter would be a good sort of fit to go in here as well, because if you flip tails on that, it doesn't really matter because you're effectively just discarding a card. That's just one fewer card that you need to worry about for last resort. So that's kind of neat. Then we have like the promo, computer error, and the better version of it in Erica. Erica lets both players draw up to 3 cards. Computer error lets both players draw up to 5, but your turn ends immediately. So this used to be passable for Blastoise, where next turn you could just rain dance all the energy you were trying to pick up. It's honestly not very good here, but it is a draw card, so I kind of had to mention it anyway. Erica is really good because it doesn't end your turn immediately, and you can play a lot of these and go into disruption stuff down below. So that's pretty nice. Mary is an interesting card. I think this works really well for some evolution decks where it used to work better with Professor Oak and stuff, but this could also be another supplemental to go with the gamble last resort thing here. You draw 2, then shuffle 2 cards from your hand back into the deck. This worked really well with stuff like Professor Oak, where you would want to shuffle back a couple of key evolution cards, say, and then discard the rest, draw 7. We don't have access to that anymore, but this could still be handy if you want to play Last Resort or Secret Mission that we'll get to later. That can help a lot. I don't have any copies of this because it wasn't rare, but you know, it is still maybe useful. Misty's Duel, you could argue this is disruption instead of actual draw, but I put it in the draw thing because honestly, it can work as both. So, you play rock, paper, scissors with the opponent. This is like Team Galactic's Wager actually, but slightly worse, I think. You play rock, paper, scissors, and whoever wins that, shuffle draws 5. So, if you lose the RPS with this, like obviously you don't want this as your only draw card, right? But if you lose the RPS, you can actually still disrupt the opponent's hand and maybe they draw into something worse, right? But if you win the RPS, this is another draw option that does not stop you from playing an Elm or something, or any other trainer if you happen to draw into them. Drawing 5 is a little awkward, like it's not the most beneficial like thing, obviously compared to 7, but realistically 7 was far too many in the first place, so I don't know. Then we got Misty's Wrath. I put this under the draw thing because it technically is a draw 2. It is one of the few ways that we're going to discard cards out of the deck, so I guess it's like a draw 2, discard 5 sort of thing really. But this lets you play ahead of stuff like Elm, where you can dump stuff you really don't need and try and condense yourself down to, okay, let's get the exact stuff. You also get a choice of what you're taking, so in a way this is better than a draw 2, but that's mostly just because you get to choose and stuff. You do have to discard a lot of resources, so if your deck is not well suited to that, you're gonna have a hard time. Sabrina's Gaze is equal parts like draw. It's more disruption. Really should have put it down in that one. These are kind of fluid categories, as you can imagine. Each player shuffles and draws they redraw their hand. So it's like reload for both players. So it is a draw card in the sense of you do get to refresh what you're playing with. It is also disruption because it stops the opponent from necessarily having the exact cards they want, but if they've just eked or something, that's going to be a fresh 7 anyway. You don't really have any info on it. This would probably be really good with the other disruption tools we'll see down here, so it probably should be here, but whatever. Secret Mission is pretty cool. You see the opponent's hand, you've got the really cute little binoculars for the Raichu there. I just think it's so cute. But you also discard and draw out of your own hand, right? You discard as many cards as you want from your hand, draw that many cards. It's hard to draw a lot of cards with this, outside of exactly for alligator decks, but again, if you see, say, what the opponent's playing, you go, I don't need my tech in this matchup, and maybe I can get rid of a couple other things and, you know, I don't want to draw later on, then you could maybe draw a few out of this, but there's like 2 layers to this is kind of neat. You do get to see what the opponent's planning. You may be able to use that for further disruption plays, but the primary goal of this card is to draw, so that's fine. And then Lucky Stadium. It's a promo that we have in the moment. We'll get more of it in the next set as an uncommon. It's a stadium card, so you can bounce things like Chaos Gem and other disruption tools with it, and both players, during their own turns, get to flip a coin, and if heads, they draw a card. Very sort of minimal thing of it, but I mean, sometimes that one card is all you need, so it's pretty cool. As far as the search options go, we've got a couple in Brock's Training Method, Brock's Training Method, Erica's Maids, and the Boss's Way, which are situational. If you are playing decks that involve Brock, Erica, or Dark Pokemon, then these are going to be very strong, because they are... Well, Erica's is trade 2, so you've got to put 2 cards back into the deck, but otherwise, it's not... Like, it's pretty unconditional. You can get a lot of good stuff out of this. So yeah, these are kind of unconditional draw, which is really, search, which is really good. Challenge is like kind of draw, but I wouldn't want to put it in the draw card because the opponent can play around it. This lets both players search basically search their deck for any number of basics that they want and bench them down. So that's kind of neat. But it is possible to play around it. Like, you might not get any effect off of this later on, but this lets you set up your evolution stuff really nicely. So definitely cool, definitely worth looking at. Energy Arc is like Energy Search, but as a double coin toss instead. You might not get any energy off of this, but you might also get 2, which is pretty neat. So yeah, on average, it's just going to be an Energy Search. There is that. Fossil Egg I put up here because of the strength of the Neo Discovery Fossil cards, but especially Aerodactyl from Neo Revelation is also like super good for a bunch of evolution based decks, so it's definitely worth considering. Good Manners is the search of the format right now. You do have to show your hand to the opponent so that you prove you don't have any basic Pokemon in there, but you get a basic Pokemon and put it into the hand just straight up. It's very, very powerful. Combos extremely well with Eek as well, because then, yeah, the opponent knows your plays for the rest of the turn, but they don't know the plays for the next turn, and that's really what matters. They can't play around your new hand. Master Ball is an interesting one. It is good for decks that have a lot of Pokemon in general, like up to 20 or more, because you do just get a hit off of this more often than not, but that also means you might not get what you want because it is just a random Pokemon after all. Sometimes that's all you really need off it though, just like thin the deck down a little bit. So it looks 7 deep, that's pretty good, so definitely worthwhile. Speaking of looking 7 cards deep, Pokegear is something here too. This doesn't pair well with Eek, so you maybe don't want to use it in decks that rely on that, or in situations where you're relying on that. But it looks 7 deep, you take any trainer card that you find there, so take your Elm, take your Wrath, whatever, and yeah, put it into the hand, and just like shuffle it up afterwards. So this sets you up for next turn, and if you are already attacking with your main Mons anyway, and not eking, then this might get you to a game-winning state, where you just show you have game in hand, right? Where that double gust, etc. comes in. It's the same sort of thing as like boss's orders nowadays, right? Breeder Fields is a fascinating card that I kind of wish was a bit more common. I guess Timer Ball kind of did this but better later on, so that's sort of neat. But basically, you flip for 1 or 2, you don't even have to flip for 2, which is good. If you only have 1 out, you can flip for 1. 1 or 2 of your non-baby Pokemon can evolve. For each heads that you get, you search your deck for a later stage card that can be stage 1 or stage 2 if you're looking from a basic. And yeah, it matches the Pokemon. So say in my Typhlosion deck last week, if I had 2 Cyndaquil down and I flipped 2 heads, I could get the Quilava and a Typhlosion if I wanted to. Very, very cool card. This will work pretty well with the OG Pokemon Breeder when that comes back in. So yeah, very nice. Pokemon March is kind of like mini challenge, except the opponent can't refuse it. So they do get a basic out their deck as well if they choose to, but this guarantees that you get a basic Pokemon onto your bench. Could be useful, could also be completely like counterintuitive. You've really got to be careful with this one. And then, yeah, we mentioned Boss Sway. So, recovery. We don't have a lot of recovery at the moment, but the recovery we have is generally quite powerful. Energy charges on a coin toss, this alongside super energy retrieval are the ways that we would get energy cards back for the most part. Like, all of these can get energy back, to be honest, but like, recharge is ideally the best one, because you do have the potential to get special energy back with this card. If you're playing a dark or metal focused deck, this is the one you'll use. That's why they're prominent on the artwork. Nightly Garbage Run and Time Capsule both do a very similar thing here. Garbage Run is the typical one that we'll play. Up to 3 Pokemon and or basic energy cards like in combination. Get those back into deck, so this gets you your Pokemon lines back. It can get you energy back if you're running out late game. Time Capsule lets both players do this, and it is 5 or nothing, or as many up to 5 as you have, like the max you can do, or 0. And both players get to effectively refresh their deck a little bit with this. This does trainer lock you for the rest of the turn, which is annoying in some ways, but there are some decks, mostly involving some destructive fire mons, that could really take advantage of this. So definitely don't sleep on it. There are some ways that this will work. And then the last one is Trash Exchange. This card is so weird, and I'm pretty sure it never comes back in like any form really. It effectively refreshes your discard pile. That's the best way I can think of putting it. It's like you keep your count of your discard cards, which TTS is really good at doing. You shuffle up the deck, like you combine it with the discard, shuffle it up, and then mill the same number of cards back down, and then dump the Trash Exchange in the discard too. This is really only used in for alligator decks, because your idea is that you want to refresh the number of waters in the discard, so you can Riptide for big damage turn after turn. But I could see this potentially being attempted in decks that use like special dark energy and whatnot. Like dark and metal energy could maybe use it to put them back in the deck. Then we have the disruption tools, of which we have seen a couple already, but there are much better ones that we can go with here. Erica's Perfume is like captivating Pokepuff in more common days, or like Mawile GX, I believe, when that was benched it did the same thing. You look at the opponent's hand and then bench as many of their basics as you want to. So can be very good in decks that do spread damage, like Tyranitar is a really good example. You would definitely consider it there, because you could the opponent's probably going to hold their basics in hand that they don't need, so you just throw them on the board and just go, nope, you ain't doing that. Imposter Oak's Revenge is the card that works really well with Erica. Discard 1 from your hand and the opponent shuffle draws 4. It's a red card, but with a discard cost on it, so definitely still extremely strong, especially if you can stop them from having Cleffa. So really good card there. Rocket Sneak Attack is still amazing. Last was the better play with Cleffa, in the format, but Last, thank God, is gone and does not come back until Ghetsis. So we definitely don't miss that. But Sneak Attack is still really good. You combine this with Noctowl and you can probably just rip the opponent's hand apart and force them to eke more than they want. Likewise, the Rocket's Trap is still a decent, if very situational card. The presence of Cleffa really does weaken this, but if the opponent doesn't have Cleffa, and let's face it, we don't have 4 copies of the card, so we don't always have it, you might still be able to stunt them. Like, it is still a classic combo for a reason, right? And we don't have as many strong draw options here, so bulking the hand back up is not easy in the slightest. Chaos Gem is still here. This card is still really good. It becomes a lot harder to set up if you can, again, kill the opponent's Cleffa and then smack them down with the with stuff like this. They'll have a really hard time recovering, so that's fine. Narrow Gym can stunt certain decks that rely on having a full bench, or like, just having a bunch of different sitters down. Stuff like Parasect is a tech option potentially, but also, you know, Typhlosion can get stunted a little bit by this. Anything that relies on, like Sabrina's Haunter, you need a ton of those down, so this can stunt their damage output. Dark Wheezing would be another one. And even just in general, only having 4 bench slots is pretty annoying for a lot of decks. Key thing with this, if you have 5 bench mons and you have something that's really badly damaged, play this, pick it back up, and you heal all the damage. It's really cool. Pokemon Tower is a new Necro Valley style thing here that will stop effects of anything really from affecting a card in the discard if it goes into hand. So think energy retrieval as the main thing with that, which we do have super energy retrieval here. Like, I didn't even really talk about it, but it's pretty strong. Getting 4 energy back into hand is a powerful late game swing. This will stop that. It also stops recycle energy from doing its thing, because that hits the discard first. Minefield Gym is also kind of neat. There's a disruption option in certain decks. I am thinking mostly Bats or Fortress would probably really work well with this. If any player benches something and they flip tails, they take 20 damage on the way in, which is pretty good. Sprout Tower is good disruption for colorless decks, although I don't think there's many good ones around at the moment, but it's still just a decent generic like stun card. And Rocket's Training Gym makes both players pay more to retreat their Pokemon, which could come up. It's not bad, because babies all have 0 retreat. We're kind of going around that not having to pay energy to retreat thing at the moment. Training Gym is a way of stopping that from being the case, so kind of cool. And then we get this sort of miscellaneous utility card type stuff here. If you're playing a Blaine deck, then Blaine itself is super good for getting extra attachments down, so that's always fun. Double Gust and Warp Point are our switch options for this set, alongside Balloonberry. This one, it's a little hard to fit in, but this card is really, really good. It's not quite Floatstone, because it discards itself after you use it, but it basically is. Instead of discarding energy, you just discard the Balloonberry. So you get a retreat for free, even if you have Snorlax tier of retreat cost. So very, very cool card. I want to play it in a couple of things, especially with like bench Cinnamons. Maybe Typhlosion would work well with this. It combines very well with Double Gust, because the opponent is going to switch in your like least useful thing, the thing that's got the highest retreat cost and whatnot. So if you Double Gust, you bait them into doing that, and then you Balloonberry, and you can retreat to the bench and just get whatever you want out. So basically 2 card Gust of Wind at that point. Warp Point gives the players the choice of what they bring in on their own side, so it sometimes is more useful because you don't get gusted into your worst option, but the opponent's probably just going to bring in like a baby or something, so bit difficult to play around, but still good. Our other pseudo-switching option is Lieutenant Surge. Again, keeping in mind that babies all have 0 retreat, some decks will play this really well by being able to like place a new 0 retreat mon in the active and then getting into whatever they want. Switch itself is not in the format, so this being a pseudo switch could potentially be good. It's pretty poor in card advantage though, or like hand advantage even, because you are taking 2 cards out of hand to do it. So it's rough. You need more draw, I think, to make it work, but it's still pretty good. Hyper Devolution Spray is very good for certain decks that rely on coming into play powers. Think Typhlosion. In fact, in general, Typhlosion's really good with it, because you could potentially refresh via recharge as well. But think Typhlosion, both sides. If you want to mill, like beat a meme deck, you could play it with Feraligatr. There's the Meganium as well, that on heads will full heal all of your Grassmons, or like all Grassmons are in play. So Devo Spray can work really well for that deck too. Speaking of full healing, Pokemon Center is fantastic for those decks that don't take a lot of energy to attack. So definitely we'll be seeing this come in. Recall is really good for certain evolution decks that can't really fit the Aerodactyl package in. Politoed is probably the biggest one for this, because it can reuse the Belly Drum or the Frog Song from previous stages. Sabrina's Psychic Control, I can't really put this under like draw cards or anything that way, because it basically just takes one of the opponent's draw cards if you flip heads, or any of the other like utility disruption type stuff you could use. So it's a bit of a miscellaneous thing. The coin toss really kills it, to be honest. There's like Rocket Secret Experiment is another one that you could argue in here, because like it also does a really good thing on a heads flip, but that one kills you if you flip tails, basically. This one just does nothing if it flips tails, but that's still like a really neg card here. This would be the sort of thing you consider just like Bill's Teleporter in this like gamble last resort setup. So maybe worth it there. Super Scoop Up, even though it does nothing if it flips tails, the heads effect is so ridiculously powerful for a very similar reason to the Devo Spray, right? Like, I didn't even mention Golbat in this one yet, but like both of these work incredibly well there. You can refresh your coming into play powers, or even sometimes your once per turn powers, by just going Scoop and then evolve into like the new one with a different evolution Pokemon that's already out, and then just go, yeah, I'm going to use the same effect again. So really good. Then we got a couple of like stadiums and some heal stuff here as well. Goldberry obviously is super strong with the utility that healing 40 provides. Super Potion's always been good, but the energy discard in a removal format was just oppressive. This having no cost to it apart from just being between turns, really helpful. Focus Band is just amazing. I mean, it doesn't always work, but 50% of the time, which is like, what, 4 times more than what it is in the real games? Like 50% of the time you just don't get KO'd, and this works incredibly well on everything, to be honest. Works really well with Pokemon Center too. And then like Rocket's Hideout, Resistance Gym, Healing Field. Healing Field is an interesting one for like one-hit KO decks. That if the opponent can't one-hit KO you and you can one-hit KO them, you could definitely play this and gain some advantage out of that. Resistance Gym is really good for the fighting decks mostly that still do get hated on a little bit by some things. And Psychic less so. I mean, Psychic, it's good for the Haunter to play with against like Murkrow and stuff like that, but honestly it's mostly for fighting. Like Donphan really doesn't like Noctowl as an example, or any other fighting resistor. This can help with that. And then Rocket's Hideout is really good if you're playing the Dark Pokemon, just like Boss's Way. It's a 20 HP extra for your Darks. Makes them competitive with the standard HP count, with generally good attacks too, so definitely nice. And then the last thing to talk about is what we'll get as the format moves on. We've got 2 more sets to pull after this. So the next set is going to introduce Mail from Bill, which is Bicycle from Gen 5. This could be helpful if you're able to pare your hand down regularly. I'm not super convinced it's going to be like the best card out there, but there will be some decks, especially trainer heavy ones, that can do that. So maybe this will still be playable. Broken Ground Gym is another form of Rocket's Hideout. This one only works on the basics, so it's like inverse Sky Arrow Bridge, which is kind of neat. But yeah, it's still pretty good. You'll probably want to play this in any sort of deck that doesn't rely on any other stadium, to be honest. Then Energy Stadium, this can work very well for efficient attackers as well. If you flip heads, you get a basic energy out your discard pile into the hand, so it's like a mini retrieval on a coin flip. Both players get to use it, but this works exceptionally well with Pokemon Center, so that you can just keep getting your stuff back. So that's really cool. Counterattack Clause is maybe a bit more niche, but this, if you flip heads on it, when the opponent damages you, it is only on the active, so you've got, if they gust it away, then it's not going to work. But like, yeah, it will hit for 20 damage if you flip heads on an opponent's attack, which is not bad. I mean, that can sometimes get you over the threshold to actually get a KO next turn. So that's cool. Then Experience All. Like, for some reason, both of these will discard themselves afterwards. Not entirely sure why. We have other ones later on in the game that don't do that. But this is the initial form of Experience Share. So if your active gets knocked out, you can get one of the basic energy that's attached to it, attach it to the Experience All Pokemon, and then discard that tool. So it preserves your energy in play, which is really good. And then for the final bit here, we do have some cards in Legendary Collection that come back. Bill is going to be seen in most decks because we don't have the greatest other draw options here. Straight Draw 2 is better than nothing. Regular energy retrieval might come back because super energy retrieval, almost called it superior, because that's what it's called later, just to make sure you can't use this one. It's really annoying, actually. Like, in Gen 5, they reprinted this as superior energy retrieval, just so that it had a different name and you can't play this one. It's really annoying. Regular retrieval only takes one discard, and often you don't have 4 energy that you need out of the discard anyway, so I think regular is probably going to come back if we want to see play that way. Mysterious Fossil because Fossil Egg is on a coin toss, and then Breeder, Trader, Scoop Up are just all fantastic cards. Scoop Up may be the least useful, arguably, but it could be a pseudo switch, so that's fine. Trader plus like good manners is ridiculous, or even Breeder Fields. Potentially, you could go the other way around as well. Like, Breeder Fields get an evolution card, trader that evolution for the basic that you want. You can do it both ways around. Very, very good card. We need this back, but gotta wait a little bit. And then Breeder, of course, if you want to go into stage 2s and stuff, that is going to be very important. So, yeah, a lot of stuff to discuss of it, but, I mean, hey, there's about 60 cards here, so it kind of makes sense, right? The options are far more limited, right? Computer search is not a thing. Item Finder Recovery is not a thing. Professor Oak, not a thing. But if you get creative, there are some solutions to that, and this maybe promotes a bit of a slower game as well, which is potentially very good, more tactical and whatnot. So I'm looking forward to it. So thank you for listening. Hopefully you have learned a thing or two about what our Rocket On format is going to look like trainer-wise. I considered doing this for Pokemon too, but I mean, look at this. There's so many of them. I don't know. It's hard to say. Like, there's a few really cool things to potentially look at in here, but I think I'd be here for like 2 hours if I wanted to try and talk through all the stuff we're getting. So I don't know about that one. Maybe we'll do something with that later. I probably will like focus on 1 or 2 of the absolute best decks that we will be able to see though, and what we're gonna do to stop them, because spoilers for Alligator is definitely coming in, and it's gonna be a lot better than when I played it, because it ain't gonna get Blastoised out. Thank you very much for listening, and until next time, take care.